One of the best things about crossover games is getting exposed to characters, places, and franchises that you might not have come across on your own. I know for me specifically, Shumagorath, Blackheart, and Jin were three characters I knew nothing about when I first saw them in the Versus games, and I think that goes for a lot of fans of the series. Not just for characters, but for stages too. In Marvel 1 alone, there's the Blue Area of the Moon, the Avengers HQ, Neo St. Petersburg from the first Strider game, to name a few. But there's one stage whose inclusion always eluded me growing up, and it wasn't until a lot later down the line that I realized where the stage is from, and honestly, it's one of the coolest stages in the series, and it's from a game that technically has representation on the game's roster. The assist roster, that is. Meet the Unknown Soldier. He's the Player 1 character of Forgotten Worlds, a horizontal scrolling shooter released in the arcades in 1988. Forgotten Worlds is something of a landmark title for Capcom's arcade division, as it was the first game of theirs to use their Capcom Play System, or CPS hardware, which would go on to run some of their most popular titles, like Final Fight, Street Fighter II in its first two revisions, and the Punisher arcade game, among others. Capcom's 1990s Marvel Fighters, including Marvel vs. Capcom itself, runs on the CPS-2 board, the successor to CPS. In Forgotten Worlds, an evil god of destruction known as Bios creates 8 godlike beings to go to different planets to conquer and drain them of life. Earth was unfortunately one of the planets targeted and becomes a bleak, nearly uninhabitable wasteland as a result. 2 soldiers born and raised on Earth, however, have now risen up to take on Bios and his army of evil gods. If the Player 2 character looks vaguely familiar, it's because Capcom would actually reuse the same character design for the Final Fight enemy 2P, the name 2P itself being a nod to his status in Forgotten Worlds as the second player character. Even funnier, his official Final Fight backstory involves him being found by the Mad Gear Gang, shirtless and without any memories of his life up to that point. He was eventually brought into the gang, implying that he may or may not be an amnesiac version of the character from Forgotten Worlds. It bears mentioning that the player characters in Forgotten Worlds do in fact begin the game shirtless. This link was more than likely the work of Capcom designer and artist Akira Yasuda, or as he's more commonly referred as, Akimen, who worked on both games in the design role around roughly the same time. It's actually not the only time Final Fight has shouted out Forgotten Worlds either. The Stage 3 boss of Forgotten Worlds, the War God, is known as Bushin in Japan, and is where Bushinryu, the fighting style used by Guy and multiple other characters in the series, derives its name from. In Guy's Capcom Fighting Evolution ending, you can see him meditating in front of a statue of said war god. And Zeku's vest in Street Fighter V also has what appears to be a depiction of him on the back of it. Both player characters would cameo in other Capcom arcade games, most notably as 2 of the people attending Eliza's birthday party in Ken's Street Fighter Alpha 2 stage. The Player 1 character, however, makes it into Marvel vs. Capcom as an assist character, shooting a bunch of projectiles before dipping off screen as quickly as he appeared. Someone on the development team must have been a big fan of Forgotten Worlds and thought that this wasn't enough representation, because Forgotten Worlds also gets represented with a full stage in Marvel vs. Capcom, the headquarters of evil. Personally speaking, growing up, I thought this might have been a Marvel stage from a corner of that universe I wasn't familiar with, given that it looked like an evil lair, and hey, who's more likely to have an evil lair besides comic book villains? In the center of the stage is a door with some kind of symbol on it. We'll talk about who it's most likely depicting in a second. There also appears to be 2 entrances to this room on either side of the stage, cloaked with green neon lights. Spooky. There's 2 figures flanking the staircases in the center of the stage and holding up what appear to be planets, and this is where things get interesting. These are the penultimate bosses of Forgotten Worlds, Huden and Leiden. Because of where they're fought in the original game, it's safe to assume that the headquarters of Evil stage is inside the Tower of Babel, which is in the background of their boss fight in the original game, and ascending the tower forms the basis of the game's final level. Their English names are localized from their original Japanese names, Fujin and Raijin, and then the inspiration behind them becomes a lot clearer. The direct homages to the characters Fuga and Raiga from Fist of the North Star. They're initially presented as obstacles to series protagonist Kenshiro, but after he defeats them, he spares their lives as he realizes that they fought under orders because their younger brother was being held captive. Holding the planets here seems to at least visually reference the various depictions of the Greek titan Atlas, who in Greek mythology waged war against Zeus and the gods, and was condemned by them to carry the heavens on his shoulders. Given Forgotten Worlds' theme of, well, worlds being captured and conquered, this works pretty well thematically. However, this likely also doubles as a nod to their Fist of the North Star inspiration as well. There, Fuga and Raiga end up sacrificing themselves to save Kenshiro from a crumbling tower. They do this by holding up the collapsed ceiling long enough for everyone to escape while the tower collapses. I don't want to mislabel or misconstrue developer and artist intention here, but the inspiration does seem obvious. On the two raised platforms directly in front of the staircase are two people, likely villains of some sort. They don't actually appear to be enemies or bosses from Forgotten Worlds though. And that also goes for perhaps the most interesting visual aspect of this stage. The hologram images showing what appears to be a virtual gathering of evildoers having a conference of some sort. I wonder if villains have data caps too. Interestingly enough, none of the characters here seem to be from Forgotten Worlds, or any Capcom game for that matter, and appear to be created specifically for this stage. And there's some really interesting character design going on here, like the one-eyed being here, or this two-toned person that actually kind of calls to mind Gil from Street Fighter. If these are in fact original designs, I think it's really neat that they made over half a dozen characters just for one stage, and only appearing for seconds at a time at that. In the background of the stage seems to be dozens of hooded figures with red hoods and gloves. They're not enemies from Forgotten Worlds, so I'd have to assume they're generally here to worship Bios, as there's what seems to be a glowing altar up the stairs in the middle of the stage. Speaking of Bios, at super jump height is what actually appears to be a giant statue of him, complete with wings and glowing eyes. Bios is the final boss of Forgotten Worlds and the main antagonist at that, so it's neat to see them looking so omnipresent here. Bios is likely who the symbol on the aforementioned door is supposed to depict. I don't have any background in marketing or anything, but I'd imagine good branding is important when it comes to that, so good for Bios. Forgotten Worlds is a game that Capcom staff and even some other developers in general seem to have some degree of reverence for. Both unknown soldiers appear in Namco Cross Capcom as a playable unit, alongside Sylphie, the shopkeeper in Forgotten Worlds. Sylphie herself enjoys a bit of popularity within the Cross series itself, also appearing in the third entry, Project Cross Zone 2 on the 3DS. Guile received a costume based on the Player 1 soldier in Street Fighter V, complete with firearms. The Shadaloo CRI website for Street Fighter V still upholds the 2P is totally the second player character from Forgotten Worlds gag, with his listed dislikes referencing enemies from the game, and his listed catchphrase is a riff off his dialogue from Forgotten Worlds ending. Forgotten Worlds itself has made the rounds in various Capcom compilations as an available game, most recently in Capcom's Arcade Stadium line. That's going to do it for this mini video. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and as always, I'll catch you next time.